ESP is real, but it isn't what you think. An experiment in sociological horror. It's been a few years now since I uncovered the truth behind ESP. I didn't call it ESP at first. Actually, I didn't have a name for it at all. All I knew was that I had this strange ability to read people's thoughts. Not every thought, but the more familiar I was with someone, the more clearly I could tell what they were thinking. Eventually, I found others like me and learned that the most common term for this ability is face reading. It goes by many names, often influenced by cultural interpretations or shaped by how telepathy is portrayed in Hollywood. But unlike in movies or TV shows, face reading isn't supernatural. No one fully understands how it works, but what I once called ESP is simply the result of paying extremely close attention to the smallest details of a person's face. Even the tiniest muscle movement can reveal a person's inner emotions, thoughts, and sometimes even their next move. The most widely accepted theory is that these subtle facial cues trigger a subconscious process in your own brain. Your mind searches for emotions or thoughts that could explain those movements, allowing you to intuitively understand the other person's mental state. That doesn't mean you can read someone's mind word for word. If you ask someone to think of a story for 1 minute, any story, you wouldn't know the exact content of what they imagined, but you would be able to tell how the story affects their emotional state. And if you know the person well enough, you might even be able to figure out exactly what story they're thinking of. This is just how it worked for me, at least. I always wondered whether everyone could do it. It seemed like a few people could, but most couldn't. Most people, in my experience, needed someone else to directly tell them if there was any change in their mental state. Only the most obvious, exaggerated facial expressions seemed to give away what someone was thinking to them. And even then, only very basic emotions, like "you made me angry," or something along those lines. I used to think that people who couldn't do what I could were just kind of dumb. But then I'd come across teachers and professors who clearly didn't have this ability either, and they obviously weren't all stupid. That made me question things. I've always had this ability, but it became much sharper around the time I started university. Back then, I didn't know why. Later, when I met others who shared this ability, I learned something interesting. The more you watch movies and television, the worse this ability tends to become. By the end of high school, I had pretty much stopped watching TV and movies, except on the rare occasions I watched with friends. Even then, people didn't really like watching with me because I'd always point out how bad the acting was. You see, when someone with this kind of ESP watches a video of a real person, not someone acting, it still works. I can read the inner emotional state of someone on camera, but only if they're not acting. You might think that people who enjoy reality TV have this ability, but that's not usually the case. Most of the time, the people on those shows are reacting mainly to the fact that they're being filmed. On something like Hoarders, for example, people generally behave the way they're expected to, or they act out in frustration because they don't want to cooperate with the producers. That is, assuming it's even real. Most reality TV is fake. But people with what I called ESP could tell in a matter of seconds, sometimes even just from a single still image, whether someone was acting or being genuine. Because of this, I naturally drifted toward other forms of entertainment. Books, video games, things like that. I never really took my ESP ability seriously, and during my college years, I mostly forgot about it. But toward the end of university, something changed. I met someone. Let's call him Matthew Vernon. Matthew was an interesting guy, a biology major working on his PhD. Unlike me, he was a graduate student. We met through the university's video game club and ended up hanging out now and then. One time we were at his place smoking some weed. I usually avoided bringing up my ESP. I didn't want to sound like some kind of nutcase. But I figured I'd float the topic and see how Matt reacted. He seemed open-minded, and since we were both getting high, maybe he'd be more relaxed about it. That's how it all started. I exhaled a hit from the joint, let a moment of silence pass, and then asked, "Do you think ESP is real?" He responded a little cautiously, "What do you mean?" I noticed his pupils shift, barely but noticeably. His relaxed demeanor subtly changed. To anyone else, he would have looked exactly the same, but I could tell through my ESP that something inside him had shifted. There were tiny muscle movements now, as if he were consciously trying to hide what he was really feeling. I hesitated, but stayed with the topic. I mean, I think I can read people's thoughts. I've never told anyone this before. Maybe I'm just imagining things. Maybe I just want to feel special or different, but it doesn't feel that way. It's like I can tell what people are thinking just by looking at them. I was about to keep explaining, but then Matt cut me off, abruptly, sharply. "You don't like watching television or movies, right?" He was staring at me now, closely studying my face for any reaction. The way he looked at me and the question he asked made it obvious. He knew exactly what I was talking about. I decided to be completely honest and ask him the things I'd always wondered about this ability. I didn't know if he had answers, but I had a hunch he knew more than I did. "Yeah," I said, laughing a little. "How did you know?" And just like that, I knew he knew that I knew he had the ability to. Before he said anything else, I felt a sudden, dramatic shift in his inner state, like he was ready to either bolt out of the room or lunge at me. No, I'm sure of it now. What he was actually thinking about was finding the nearest object he could use as a weapon to bash my skull in. A regular person wouldn't have noticed anything out of the ordinary. Even with ESP, it was hard for me to interpret what was going on because Matthew was doing everything he could to suppress any sign of emotion in his face and body. Then he said, "Are you one of them?" I had no idea what he meant, but I could tell he was carefully watching me for signs of nervousness, waiting to see if I was about to lie. I answered honestly, "One of." "Who?" Just like that, his inner state shifted again, from barely contained violence to cautious relief. He seemed to accept my answer, but I could still sense that he was holding something back. He was mostly calm toward me now, but still unsure, still uncertain whether it was possible for one of them to lie convincingly. He remained on edge. Eventually he said, "No, I don't think you are. How much do you actually know about reading minds? Tell me when you first started to realize you were different." So I told him everything, mostly stories from my childhood, moments that stood out to me. The more I shared, the more his internal tension faded. Bit by bit, he began to loosen his grip over his facial expressions. He was starting to trust me. Then he said, "I need to tell you something really important, and I need you to promise not to think I'm crazy. I mean, we are talking about ESP here, right?" "Right," I replied, curious where this was going. "Well," he continued, "I don't tell most people this, but I actually spent a few years in prison. I have the same thing you call ESP. And there are others, plenty of others, who have it too. In America, at least, all the people in power, the real ruling class, they have this ability, and they use it to manipulate everyone who doesn't." "How do you know that?" I asked. "Well, the reason I ended up in prison was because someone at my job figured out what I could do," Matthew said. "I used to work as a cashier at Winn-Dixie, and I'd often use my ability to flirt with women. I'd use it to tell whether a female customer was attracted to me. If she was, I'd flirt, get her number, and we'd usually hook up. I did this pretty regularly and gained a bit of a reputation at work for being a ladies' man. But the managers were watching. I think they started to notice that I only flirted with customers who were clearly into me. My success rate was too perfect to be a coincidence. I'm pretty sure one of the higher-up managers caught on and watched me closely enough to figure out what I was doing." "But you didn't break any laws," I interrupted. He shot back sharply, annoyed. Since when do the laws mean anything to these people? I had no response. The moment the words left my mouth, I realized how naive I sounded. I could tell he lost a bit of respect for me right then. And now, looking back, I understand. It was a really stupid thing to say. After a brief silence, Matthew continued. Anyway, what happened next blew my mind. On my last day at work, the police walked in and asked, "Are you Matthew Vernon?" I said yes, and they told me I needed to come with them to the station. I asked why, and one of the officers said they had video of me stealing a large sum of cash from the safe deposit box in the back of the store. I started to protest, but then he added, "Do I need to cuff you?" So I went quietly. I hadn't stolen anything, so I figured maybe the footage was low quality or that I'd been mistaken for someone else. There were a few guys who kind of looked like me, but when they showed me the video, it was me. Clear as day, no blur, no confusion. It looked exactly like me doing exactly what they accused me of. I don't know how they pulled it off, but I'm convinced that whoever's behind this, whoever's really in control, can fabricate videos so realistic that no jury in the world would ever question their authenticity. I have no idea how long they've had that kind of tech, but this happened to me around 10 years ago, so at least that long. I could feel it in my gut. Everything he was saying was true. It shook me. I'd never imagined something like that was even possible, let alone something that actually happened to people. I was too stunned to say anything, so I just let Matthew keep talking. "I pleaded not guilty at the trial," Matthew said, "and tried to argue that the person in the video wasn't me, even though it clearly looked like me. I thought I could prove my innocence by pointing out that I hadn't made any major purchases, hadn't paid off any debts, hadn't made any large deposits. But none of that mattered. I was sentenced to 5 years in prison. All I knew was that some kind of fabricated evidence had been used to convict me, and I still didn't fully understand why. Like you, I didn't fully grasp the nature of my ability back then. I hadn't yet made the connection between using it to pick up customers and getting arrested. But I would, eventually." "How did you figure it out?" I asked. "Well," he continued, "at first, I assumed that whoever set me up was going to torture me, maybe even kill me. I kept waiting for the moment I'd be dragged out and beaten to death or something. But that moment never came. Instead, something much stranger happened. From the very beginning, I was kept separate from the other inmates in a special cell. My cell was different. It had a television in it. But the TV was weird. I couldn't change the channel, I couldn't turn it off, and the volume was always blasting. It was impossible to ignore. They didn't let me have any books, and my meals were brought to me. I was allowed very limited interaction with the other prisoners, just a couple hours of exercise per day. And I always had the strong sense that I was being watched. I asked a few of the other inmates if their setup was like mine. Every time, they were shocked. Some of them even assumed I must have been a serial killer or a pedophile to get that kind of treatment. He paused for a moment, then said, "It was the television. That's what it was all about. See, people like us, people with what you call ESP, we can always tell when someone is acting. That's why most of us don't enjoy TV or movies. The acting feels off, unnatural. Growing up, we think it's just that we're different. But what's really going on is that television actually deadens people's ability to use ESP. The fake facial cues, the awkward body movements, they're designed to throw us off. They train the brain to disconnect what someone appears to be feeling from what they're really feeling. The goal is to make us treat what's on television as reality and to start seeing the real world as just a flawed version of it. Once your mind buys into that, your ability to read people, your ESP, starts to fall apart." Curious, I asked him, "What did you call it?" "I used to just call it mind reading," he replied. "Anyway, over time, It became clear to me that the more television I watched, the worse my mind reading ability got. I guess it's like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it becomes. But if you stop using it, or if you're constantly exposed to false signals, you lose your edge. Eventually, you can only pick up the most basic surface level thoughts from people. That's what I realized they were doing to me, isolating me, bombarding me with fake emotional signals through the TV. I didn't know if they were ever actually going to let me out, but I figured that if they were, I'd need to play along with whatever their plan was. He paused, then looked at me with an intensity I recognized. I could tell he was about to ask something important, something tied to how we first started this conversation. "How well was I able to hide myself from you earlier?" he asked. "What exactly were you able to sense?" I answered as honestly as I could. "Well, I wasn't completely sure, but I could feel this huge wave of panic coming off you. I didn't know whether you were about to run or kill me. I had this really vivid sense that you were thinking about the nearest blunt object you could use to bash my skull in. Was I right?" "Yes," he said. "That's exactly what I was thinking. I haven't had to practice hiding my feelings in a long time. Back in prison, I knew that if they believed I still had the ability, they might never let me out. Or worse, they'd kill me. I had a mirror in my cell, and I'd use it to train myself. Every day, I'd look into it and try to mask my emotions. I didn't even know if it was working. But whenever I got angry or upset about my situation, I would watch myself closely in the mirror, doing everything I could to keep it off my face. Toward the end of my 5 years, they told me I'd only be released if the prison psychiatrist cleared me. So when the time came for that interview, I had already spent a lot of time learning to control my expressions, but I knew that wouldn't be enough. What they were really looking for wasn't just my emotions or thoughts. They wanted to see whether I could still use my mind-reading ability. He paused, lit the joint that had long since gone out, and took a slow hit. The prison psychiatrist said a lot of things to me, but nothing directly about mind reading. To this day, I don't know if he had the ability himself, but I just assumed he did. I was tempted not to look at his face, thinking it might give me away, but I figured that would be even more suspicious. So I tried to look at him as neutrally as possible, blank, calm. He asked me a bunch of questions. Some of them felt like traps, designed to see if I'd scan him to check whether he was lying or trying to deceive me. But I stayed calm. I didn't overthink anything. I just answered quickly, whatever came to mind. I think that's what saved me, because a few weeks later, I was released. I had been sensing for a while that he knew more than he was letting on, so I decided to ask the question that had been on my mind the whole time. "Did you ever meet anyone else like us?" "Yeah," he said. "After I got out of prison, I connected with an organization called the Society. They're a small group of people who've come to realize they have this ability, and they're trying to understand what it means for people like us. According to them, the ruling elite of our society, government, corporate, media, they all have this ability too. They have their own secret networks that help them maintain power and control. The society doesn't know much about these elite groups, and they avoid them at all costs. As my story shows, it's dangerous to let them know you have the ability. You can't just join their psychic club. If they find out about you, they'll either do what they did to me, try to suppress your ability, or just eliminate you altogether. A lot of society members have disappeared over the years, probably discovered. That's why they keep their membership strictly confidential, even I'm not officially a member." "How did you find them?" I asked. "Kind of like this, actually," he said with a half smile. "I met a woman named Melanie at a club. I didn't realize it at first, but she had already used her ability to read me, watching how I used mine to pick up women. She confronted me, called me a disgusting male chauvinist pervert. I panicked. I thought I was about to get sent back to prison for the exact same thing as before. She saw the shift in my inner state immediately and quickly apologized. Then she asked if we could talk somewhere in private. She said she had something important to tell me. That's how I learned about the society. She gave me a bunch of literature, told me to read it, and warned me to stop using my ability in such an obvious, careless way. I swallowed, and almost immediately Matthew said, "I'll get us something to drink." He stood up and headed to the kitchen, returning a few minutes later, longer than it should have taken, with a couple of beers. I figured he must have grabbed something else too. When he came back, he handed me one of the beers and a small pamphlet titled, "What You Need to Know About This World." "What's that?" I asked. "It's the piece of literature they give to everyone they discover who has the ability," he said. "Even if we're not official members of the society, it's our duty to pass this along to others like us, so they can at least learn how to protect themselves." We downed the beers quickly, and our conversation shifted to lighter, more casual topics. I could tell Matthew didn't like talking about any of this for too long. It weighed on him. Eventually, he seemed tired and ready to end the night. "It's getting late," he said. "You should take this with you and head home. Don't let anyone see you carrying it." We said our goodbyes, and I slipped the pamphlet into my pants pocket. It got a bit crumpled, but it was still perfectly readable. When I got back to my apartment, I went straight to my room, sat on my bed, and decided to read it. It wasn't very long, but it contained several powerful excerpts that I think you'll find interesting. You may know this ability as telepathy, mind reading, ESP, visions, or other names. The most accurate and scientific term is face reading. Humans and even animals give away a tremendous amount of information through facial expressions. The face is the main channel for this ability, though the body also conveys significant cues. The rulers of this country are all aware of this ability. Their primary tool of control is television. It not only influences people's thoughts and behaviors, but also prevents the natural development of this ability in the population. We still don't know exactly how long this form of control has been in place. Many people, even those who avoid watching TV or films, will never develop the ability to a high enough level to influence others effectively. We suspect that, before television, religious institutions served a similar role, led by individuals highly skilled in this ability, who used it to manipulate millions. "The world today is far more dangerous," the pamphlet read, "because the ruling class's ability to manipulate the inner states of ordinary people is more advanced than ever before. In the past, those who possessed this ability could only influence emotions in a crude, imprecise way. But now, they've applied the scientific method to both reading and altering others' inner states. They can make people feel love or hatred almost on command. They can rally millions to support any cause they choose, and they do, even if it brings them only the slightest advantage. The ruling classes fiercely guard this ability. If someone develops it independently and is detected, they will be dealt with. We don't know exactly how detection works, but it appears there is a classification system. If your ability is considered low level, you'll be separated from society and systematically conditioned to forget how to use it. If your ability is stronger, they will simply eliminate you. They do not tolerate rivals. Only those born into their bloodlines or secret societies are permitted to possess and use this power. Since the 1970s, at least in the United States, the ruling class has deployed highly trained agents whose sole job is to identify others with the ability. These agents move through the world unnoticed, silently observing people for signs of ESP use. This is why using the ability in public is extremely dangerous. It's nearly impossible to hide it from someone skilled in detection. Even avoiding eye contact can be a giveaway. The pamphlet contained many more passages like this. But after reading it, I never looked at the world the same way again. I felt lucky no one had discovered me before. Still, I didn't know what to do next. Matthew had advised me to try living a normal life. The society had more materials on how to avoid detection in everyday situations, but they warned that the greatest danger always comes from the workplace. That's where we're most exposed. Because once you climb high enough in any corporate structure, you'll find that everyone at the top possesses this ability. And if you weren't born into their networks, they will discover you and remove you. The society actually recommends living a normal, quiet life. Working a low-profile, menial job is the best way to remain invisible. Matthew didn't follow that advice. After college, I tried to stay in touch with him. But one day, he just disappeared. He stopped answering emails. His Facebook account went dark. His phone number was disconnected. I never heard from him again. My guess is that he tried to work in a scientific lab and got detected. As for me, I got a degree in accounting. Now I work at a small grocery store. I've never been tempted to use the ability the way Matthew did. I keep to myself. I don't draw attention. Because deep down, I still believe they're out there, watching, waiting for people like me to slip up.